Hi, poetry lovers. Welcome to my channel, Bella Poetry Presents. In this segment, we will talk about another amazing woman that is kind of mostly forgotten, but I think it's important to talk about these people, especially women, female poetesses that that were so politically active, that wrote poetry, that made a living from poetry at the times when women did not have a lot of rights. And I think it's important to talk about them and remember them and their work. We'll talk today about an English poet, Helen Maria Williams. Helen Maria Williams. Helen Maria Williams was a very colorful character born in 18th century who managed to stir up trouble for herself at almost every turn. Her considerable output of poetry and prose was often of highly political nature. She criticized the French government of Napoleon, supporting the revolutionaries during France's reign of terror. Now, I mentioned this French reign of terror, or France's reign of terror, before. So what was it? The Reign of Terror was a very violent period during the French Revolution from September 1793 to July 1794, when the revolutionary government led by Maximilien Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety executed tens of thousands of perceived enemies of the revolution through mass arrests and public executions, primarily by guillotine, in a climate of extreme paranoia and fear. It was marked by radical social and political changes, including de-Christianization, and it ended with Robespierre's own execution, signaling a shift away from the extreme violence. Helen Williams also made outspoken statements on the abolition of slave trade, not just about the French Revolution. Alternatively, she occasionally wrote more lyrical pieces such as hymn written about the Alps and sonnet to strawberry. She wrote, by the way, many beautiful sonnets, and we'll read some of them: a sonnet to the moon and a sonnet to hope. She spent much of her life living in France and was a renowned translator from French into English, thus keeping people back in her homeland up to date with the terrible events in France at the end of the 18th century. Little is known of her early life. Helen Williams was born, according to some reports, in June 1759, although this sometimes varies by a year or two. And that's where the discrepancy comes when we talk about how old she was when she died. In some places, it's written that she was 65, and in some sources, it says that she was 68. And so her father was Welsh, and he was an army officer in the British Army. And when she was only 8 years old, her father died. And subsequently, her family moved to Berwick-upon-Tweed, a small town on the Scottish border where she was privately educated. By the age of 22, Helen was able to move to London by herself. And she was introduced to the cream of London literary society by a man named Andrew Keepis. She met a number of people, very famous acquaintances, as William Wordsworth, who featured her in one of his own poems written in 1787. In London in 1781, just as she moved to London, she published her poem Edwin and Etruda. She made a wide literary acquaintance, which included Dr. Samuel Johnson and the Scottish very famous poem Robert Burns as well. And also she met some prominent radicals as Joseph Priestley and William Godwin, who was actually the father of Mary Shelley, a famous poet and an author of Frankenstein. In the 1780s, she achieved some success with the poetry. Her collected poems, published in 1786, had a subscription of some 1,500 names. The first important experience of Williams' interest in social reform came with her poem on the slave bill. That was published in 1788, and her opposition to slavery was also in her novel Julia, published in 1790, which also indicated her support for French Revolution. She spent the summer of 1790 in revolutionary France, returned again in late 1791, and settled there in the late 1792. Her sympathy for the revolution is recorded in the volumes of letters published from 1790 to 1796. She was particularly attracted to the moderate Girondins. Now, who were the Girondins? I mentioned it before. They were a moderate Republican political faction during the French Revolution. They were active from 1791 to 1793 in the Legislative Assembly and National Convention. They championed the abolition of the monarchy, but later resisted the radicalization of the revolution, leading to their eventual destruction. She allowed her Paris salon to serve as a meeting place for them, for the Girondins, as well as for British radicals. Among the attendees were the English-American political pamphleteer Thomas Paine and the English feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, who was actually the wife of William Godwin. Many critics saw her as excessively radical in her views, and sometimes she was even portrayed as sexually wanton. She was a single woman, and sometimes if she traveled with a man, people looked at her as someone who is sexually, so to speak, loose. Many arrested with other British citizens in October 1793, Williams was soon released but had to leave Paris the following year. She went to Switzerland for 6 months in June to escape persecution. She traveled with a man whose name was John Herford Stone, and actually her travel with this man caused the rumors that considered her, that spread, that called her a sexually wanton woman. John Herford Stone was presumably married, and allegedly she had an affair with him. However, there is no proof to substantiate it, and Helen was adamant that she had behaved correctly and she never had a relationship with this man. In 1798, Helen's sister Cecile, who by then was married, passed away, and Helen became an adoptive mother to her 2 nephews. Her 2 nephews, their names was Athanase and Charles. So she took care of them because her sister died. In later years, Helen went to live in Amsterdam with her eldest nephew, but returned once more to Paris and continued interpreting the latest French trends for English speakers for the rest of her days. Helen Maria Williams passed away on December 15, 1827, at the age of 68. 8. And today we will read a couple of her sonnets. I think she was a wonderful poet and an amazingly brave woman who stood up for her principle and her political views. So the first poem we'll read is Sonnet to the Moon. The glittering colors of the day are fled. Come, melancholy orb, that dwellest with night. Come, and over earth thy wandering lustre shed, thy deepest shadow and thy softest light. To me congenial is the gloomy grove, when with faint light the sloping uplands shine. That gloom, those passive rays alike I love, whose sadness seems in symphony, in sympathy with mine. But most for this pale orb thy beams are dear. For this benignant orb I hail thee most, that while I pour the unveiling tear and mourn that hope to me in youth is lost, thy light can visionary thoughts impart and lead the muse to soothe a suffering heart. And the second one is called Sonnet to Hope. Oh, ever skilled to wear the form we love, to bid the shapes of fear and grief depart, come, gentle hope, with one gay smile remove the lasting sadness of an aching heart. Thy voice, benign enchantress, let me hear, say that for me some pleasures yet shall bloom. In fancy's radiance, friendship's precious tear shall soften or shall chase misfortune's gloom. But come not glowing in the dazzling ray, which once with dear illusions charmed my eye. Oh, strew no more, sweet flatterer, on my way the flowers I fondly thought too bright to die. Visions less fair will soothe my pensive breast, that asks not happiness, but longs for rest. Two beautiful sonnets by Helen Williams. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.